much for sharing. Now we are moving to the panelist section. First of all, it will be great for our panelists to introduce your school or yourself. We can start with Mr. David Delgado.
Okay, so got my mute off. Well, good evening. Thank you. I did my homework and figured out how to get the background put on my Zoom here. I'm actually more than 6 feet away from Melody, so don't have to worry about that. Cambrian Academy is a small private college preparatory school that's for both local and international students, ranging from grades 6 through 12. And relating to tonight's topic, I'd imagine anyone who goes to the effort of starting a private school already has specific reforms and innovation in mind. We do it to provide something we believe is missing. So here, we prepare our students to enter the universities of their choice and to be successful in their continuing education at those universities. We really want to be considered a true college prep, meaning that parents don't need to enroll their children in learning centers, test prep centers, and the like. On top of that foundation, we want to prepare them to acquire knowledge, skills, and characters so that they may enjoy happy, productive lives. Then in the case of international students, that comes with its own special challenges, which I believe we'll be talking about more tonight.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Now we are going to move to Austin for sharing either yourself or your school.
Yeah, I'm really happy to be here. Although it's odd to be presenting to so many people without being able to see them. I don't think I've had that experience before. It's very interesting. So Avenues is a global pre-K through 12 school with campuses in New York City, Sao Paulo, Brazil, Shenzhen, China, online. We have a fully online campus that I'll be talking about, and plans to open in Silicon Valley in 2021. We exist to uniquely prepare future leaders with the world wisdom and the understanding and the skills to solve global scale problems. And that's why we have so many campuses around the world, in order to facilitate that global understanding and global cooperation. And our pedagogy and curriculum matches that, really focused on applied project-based learning, students doing authentic things that matter in the world outside of school, as well as a big focus on language learning as what it means to have empathy for other people around the world and to be prepared to do those things.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Now we're going to move to Cindy.
Hi, everyone. This is Cindy, and I'm also very excited to be part of the panel today. So just a little bit about myself to begin with. So my career started at Bain & Company as its associate consultant, and actually pivoted into the world of K12 education after getting my master's degrees from Wharton MBA and UPenn Graduate School of Education. In fact, I was very intentional about getting involved in a mission-driven industry like education, and really asked myself to contribute from a strategic perspective to really maximize my impact with the skill sets I have. In the past 3 years, I have been exploring a lot in the education space. I interviewed school founders, talked to teachers, observed classrooms in a lot of innovative schools in China, the US, Southeast Asia, and Africa. I also interned and worked in private schools, charter schools, and international schools. Some of those schools are at startup stage, so I get to see a more entrepreneurial side of the school lounge. And some other schools are at the scaling stage. So it's interesting to see how to move from a smaller organization and codify the system enough to prepare for the scaling of impact. It's definitely very thought-provoking to learn more about schools as organizations, and people who work in a school can echo that it's actually a very intricate and complex ecosystem that connects many stakeholders to deliver a massive matrix of objectives. So right now, I am working at a school called Ming Charter School as its Director of Operations and Strategy. So just a little bit about my school. Ming Charter School is a Mandarin immersion charter school located at the heart of Oakland, California. So since Ming was founded in 2011, it has been building an excellent model that develops bilingual global citizens. So our innovation as a school is to implement a high-performing language immersion model in the context of public education. And you may think that this is not a fancy statement at all. Why is this innovative? To be honest, anyone who have learned Mandarin as a second language can probably echo that Mandarin is a very challenging language to learn. And in order to teach that language under the budget constraints and just a lot of limitations in a public education system, it's not easy. And we are not trying to only serve students with resources, like supplementary resources to learn Mandarin at home, but also students from underprivileged communities that heavily rely on school resources to learn. We are also constantly aiming to diversify our student demographics to serve more and more high-need students, which really challenge us to innovate our school model to hold all student groups to the highest standard of excellence possible. We are also investing a lot in our social emotional curriculum and really differentiate our instruction according to students' learning differences and needs. Our middle school curriculum is project-based and uses Summit Learning platform to further personalize student learning. So as you can imagine, there are a lot that goes into our school model. It's a very ambitious school model, and it takes a lot of organizational and operational innovation to be able to run this model under public funding constraints. So this is just the start of it, and I'm really excited to share more about my observations and reflections in the education space, and of course, learn more from other amazing panelists and the moderators. Thank you.
Thank you, Cindy. I totally agree with your point about being restricted by public funding, and then you're doing all kinds of different programs at UMing. So before I go into the panel specific question, I want to thank Dr. Paul again for being here. She actually has another appointment and could not be here with us the whole time. So just I really want to thank her again for being here. Thank you, Dr. Paul.
Thank you for having me. I'm sorry I can't stay, but it sounds fascinating. I'll ask Melody and Cassie anyone for the notes. So thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye. Cindy, thank you so much for your introduction, and I learned so much about UMing Charter School. So I want to please allow me to keep you here for the next question. I know that, like you said, UMing is a charter school, and you have a very dynamic demographic, and there might be some students coming from the low-income families. Can you share some more about the actions that the school has been taken to make learning equitable, especially during the COVID-19 time? We heard a lot about like kids fighting for iPads and devices to learn, or they even don't have connection to the internet. So I really hope you can talk more about the equity side of this question. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for the question. Yeah, indeed, this is a really challenging time, and it's a very unusual time for everyone around the world. And our school also went through an exceptionally tough time of transformation in response to the global pandemic. Really, in my opinion, the most challenging part is not getting students settled in the distance learning. It's not transitioning to remote work in a compliant way. It's not to respond to the anxiety among all staff members and families. But of course, all those are very challenging, as you can imagine. It's really just like Melody pointed out really sharply. The biggest challenge to me is how to orient our resources to best serve the most needy at this terrifying time. So our leadership team really challenged ourselves with a mission impossible, which is to accomplish 100% online rate on the day one of distance learning. And that means on the first day of distance learning, we want to connect with every single student at UMing, either in the Zoom classes or through the phone calls with teachers, depending on the format of learning designed for each grade. So among all our students, we're not only having students with resources, we actually do have families who do not have access to devices, who do not have stable internet, who do not even know how to turn on Chromebooks or a device, who have never heard of Zoom or Google Classroom whatsoever. We want to make sure that all of these people are also ready on day one to be able to connect and learn through our distance learning program. So 100% is really just a number to outsiders, but it actually involves the entire team of UMing staff who make very intentional effort to reach and serve needy families. We distributed about 100 Chromebooks and headsets to all families who needed it and provided on-site technology support even under this very stressful pandemic kind of circumstances to make sure that families can log on to all portals needed for distance learning. We made as many phone calls as possible as the family need us to confirm whether they have what they need for a new form of learning, whether they have the device, the internet, and the instruction. We do everything it takes to support families to get ready, even if that means some leadership team member have to drive around the neighborhood to drop off some devices for a few families who wasn't able to receive devices on site. So on the first day of distance learning, we actually made it. We accomplished our goal of 100% online rate. Of course, we are super proud of this starting point, but we didn't stop there either. We quickly formed a team of distance learning assistants who used to play a very different responsibility in a school before, but now we transition their responsibility to mainly support families during distance learning time. And their main duties are to remind families to get online for classes, to follow up with students who miss classes, to discover issues that may prevent students from learning online. So with this team support, we have maintained a higher than 98% attendance rate every single day. And most days it's actually more than 99%. We also designed a multi-tier family support process, which involves our distance learning assistants, our family resource liaison, our student support team, and our leadership team. And we maintain a very robust database to keep track of all the needs we service during distance learning. And this database really allows us to identify high need families to provide our support more proactively and to allow us to evaluate the responsiveness of our services to those families. In this process, I really do feel that I'm a lot more connected with all my families and know more about who we are truly serving in the community. There is a lot to reflect. One question that I keep asking myself was how we as school leaders could serve our families more sustainably. It's actually very hard because there are a lot of competing needs, as you can imagine, under this kind of stress around the world. On the one hand, we really want to hold all students to the highest expectations of excellence, even under the global pandemic, right? We do not want any of our students to fall behind during this time, and we want them to maintain their competitiveness through distance learning, or even improve their competitiveness if our program is strong. And on the other hand, we also have a lot of compassion and empathy for low-income families who may undergo a lot of different issues right now. They may go through unemployment, they may not have food, they may get sick, they may have other complex life circumstances and uncertainties and conflicts. And we do understand that they may have other priorities in life that's more pressing than students learning. How do we achieve this balance is definitely not an easy question. So all we can do right now is to continue to reflect as a team on what's the best way to support families to navigate in this challenging landscape and provide a place of stability and certainty that everyone can count on in this very turbulent time of global pandemic.
Thank you, Cindy, for sharing. As this is really on normal time for everyone, I believe it's maybe also more specifically for international students with the time that is happening right now with everything that is happening. So today, Cambrian Academy has a significant number of international students from all over the world. And some of those students are staying in homestay. Can you share of some of the unique challenges that Cambrian Academy has encountered and how the school helped those minority international students to cope with the challenges, both academically and emotionally?
Yes, Cassie. After watching last night's forum, I thought I would start this part off with sort of bookends on either side of what we do. A quick Google search of articles will quickly remind us that when international students transfers here for freshman year of college. It could be a major culture shock. Stories ranging from depression and addictions all the way to suicides are not difficult to find. Many students are able to adjust and succeed, but I think the same underlying cause may be present in all of them, and I think something can be done about it. Now we jump to here from last night, talking about the 0 to 3 info, the importance of the early childhood education, and that although the state doesn't spend as much on it, a lot of parents spend a lot. It was incredible on my visit to China, going through the malls and seeing all the stimulus given to these infants through 3s there in their little swimming tubs and then swimming pools, and then the next slot over in the mall was the art school, then the piano school, then the after school, and there are a lot of them getting that early childhood education. These parents love their babies and will spend anything on that a supposed early childhood expert tells them to do. So that category of student really is ready to learn, but what happens in this, they're put into sort of one size fits all system. They got the learning the development is rote. There's not a lot of teacher, I don't understand, can you help explain this to me? So they're prepared, they do really well. So even though they're wired for early success to go into, success there, they go into a sort of a one-way teach-learn environment. They've been successful, but I find a lot of them that get here haven't stepped outside the box. It's kind of all about the correct answer and no discussion. And that's what brings us to the overarching challenge, because you were asking about challenge. The point in the development where I've decided to insert Cambrian Academy, where the challenge is to continue the academic education at an optimal pace while helping the student adjust his or her understanding of education. Students who've been taught an environment where there's always correct answer have become great at memorizing, repeating facts and information. However, then the processing, manipulating, synthesizing, and heaven forbid guessing can be awkward and uncomfortable thing. I've asked very high scoring newcomers for an opinion or what do you think? And I think we've all seen that sort of terrified blank look. So it's important to work on that. And as we begin to develop these new skills in a student, it's almost inevitable the student will get his first B. So there's also the emotional counseling component that I'll get to later, but I want to help them step out of the box, learn how to apply the data they've memorized, help them to adapt to American education culture before being tossed into college. I think it's a most difficult challenge, but if done right, it can be the most profitable transformation point in a student's life, which kind of brings us to this vision I have of the super student. Coming from the education system, I see them coming from China here. They have been really indoctrinated with the importance of education. They work very, very hard to satisfy the expectations. They do everything they can within that system, and then they're taught to respect education. A lot of things that I really admire that I think have kind of gone missing in American education as time has gone on. But we do get the two types of students that we kind of mentioned last night as well. The really brilliant ones who are ready to move on and weak and high achievers. We also get the ones who aren't or didn't get that early head start, and parents just think they need a different type of learning. But the underlying challenge to me is the same. It's providing for a successful transition to the American college culture, and that brings up all the sort of sub-challenges of emotional support. We all know you can't refer a suspected emotional issue or possible learning disability back to a parent. It's a taboo type of subject. Yet these living, breathing child that we care about very much is right here with us. And the challenge is to provide some level of mentoring that can identify and address issues before before they reach this point that would lay the shame of outside intervention on the child. And we know and recognize when it comes to helping these children, we're on our own here. So design the school to address it in a few different ways. One is the mix of local and international students. Okay, we're not a school that brings international students, puts them all in ESL, and they're segregated from the rest. We make sure they are included in this. Correct backgrounds. I think the value of that, we mainstream them, fullest extent possible. They're able to learn the culture and English from their new friends. They see their American counterparts expressing and backing up opinions, making guesses when asked. And on the other hand, I constantly point out to our locals that these are young children who have left their families, left their friends, left their culture, left their school, left their country to come live with sometimes strangers because of the value they put on education. And I see how that does wonders in terms of lifting each other. There's benefits to the both of them. The other way we monitor the emotional health of our students is through our mentor program, where a faculty member who's not their teacher will regularly check to see how their life is going. Okay, sensitive teachers can approach the issues, I think, in a way that won't create that stigma of counseling or therapy. But in reality, after all, most therapy is just talking about our thoughts and our feelings. Here.
Ooh.
So this COVID-19 really did throw a wrench into the machinery, and it really brought some of the other issues that we need to deal with international students. It brought them kind of the forefront. The counseling, that's kind of an obvious thing, but with the isolation happening, there's not so much contact or physical activity. We really want to make sure we're watching out for their mental health, how they're adjusting. It's already an issue. We can't go for really outside help, but sensitive teachers can approach the issues, I think, in a way that won't create that sort of stigma of counseling. The other thing, it's a challenge that, our teachers, as we recognize something does have to be done, to be able to find the way to do it and to get through it. Sometimes there's risks with it. I remember having to push the issue with the risk that we had a girl who, she would fall asleep, not pay attention to teachers, looked like maybe there was some sort of reason she needs to go to see the doctor. Well, I knew if I pushed, we'd, be hearing from media or from lawyers or something, because you can't diagnose something like that. But I felt it was important enough to push. And what did it turn out to be? It turned out that case, she had narcolepsy, catalepsy, got the right medication that Friday, and was a brilliant student on the very next Monday, Tuesday moving forward. As someone who was old enough to start driving pretty soon, would have fallen asleep at the wheel. So we have to really, really find the way to carefully and effectively we can watch out for not only helping them to adjust, helping them to learn how to achieve, but also to take care of their emotional health as well. And because we're really kind of at the time that I'm given, there's issues of helping them learn academic integrity, motivation, self-motivation, their sleep patterns. Now they're probably more inclined to be communicating with their friends back home, which their sleep patterns are going to be something we have to help them watch. Physical activity, get outdoors, walk around a little bit. You're already sitting in front of the screen enough. So we really want to focus on being that in between that'll transition them to a successful and productive college career, not one that's going to have them falling apart when they get a B or a C or don't know who to turn to at the college. We want them to understand education's about building your own minds and skills, valuing yourself. The proud parents and everything else is only a fortunate byproduct. Can't be the goal. If it's a goal, they're kind of in trouble already. But I think that's an important role, and why I really want, to be able to see students at least 2 years, the junior year, senior year, to be able to take that opportunity to transition, to have a successful, run at their college.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dave. This is so insightful, and you really make me to reflect on my experience of being. Well, I came to the United States when I was 17, and then so I went through the whole transition about understanding education, getting myself into the American culture, and also like mentally, psychologically, I also like have to go through a lot of things. So like really thank you so much for pointing this out to our audience. Before I move on to the next question, I do want to remind our audience that we have the Q&A button at the bottom. So if during the panel discussion, if you have any question, want to ask our speaker, please type your question and then we will take care of them later in our Q&A section. Thank you. And I will move on the next question to Austin. Hi, Austin. Thank you for being here today. And the next question is for you. It's very exciting that Avenue has been running a fully online campus for a number of years, and you have led the world language program as part of it. Can you share how do you envision the concept of on-campus, a fully online campus, especially under the influence of COVID-19 that put online education to the front line? What are some of the opportunity and threats that you see from a fully virtual education environment? Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a really interesting time as we're kind of forced to change and do things completely differently. There may be things we discover that we hated a lot more than we anticipated, and maybe things that we discover work a lot better than we anticipated, and some habits might stay. It's an interesting time. For our online campus, which runs grades 6 through 12, it's interesting that it wasn't significantly affected by the event and was able to continue business as usual, which is really incredibly fortunate, and has highlighted some of the interesting opportunities of kind of a virtual education environment. Specifically in terms of language learning, which is the part that I'm responsible for in our online campus, one of the most exciting things is that being an online school really dramatically increases the number of languages that you can offer, because it's not limited by the geography of teachers who speak the language in a given area. So in Avenues Online, we actually offer any language that a student wants to learn. So you can pause and think about that. It's no problem if a student wants to learn Hungarian or French or Arabic or some other language. We're able to find a teacher somewhere in the world to enable the student to learn that. And so it's really taking advantage of kind of this long tail where you might not normally have enough students to make a full class in a subject. And so now you can really personalize these specific interests and desires for families, which is pretty amazing. Another advantage we have is the curriculum is set up so that there's a weekly video project. And that is really an incredible opportunity in terms of assessment, right? You never kind of want two high stakes tests to make one decision or to make a super important decision just based on one data point. And so that kind of weekly video enables us to really assess the student in a holistic and authentic way where we're seeing their progress over time and have that incredibly well documented, which is normally confined to a lot of written work, right? Like that happens with the work that students are turning in, homework and things like that. a brick and mortar campus, but to have this video portfolio showing their progress over time is a really pretty amazing thing in order to see their progress. Another advantage is that a lot of us now have this vocabulary of synchronous and asynchronous learning. I don't think very many people thought about that before this happened. What happened synchronously? What happens asynchronously? And now these are kind of common vocabulary words for us. And so a lot of schools have learned that, you know, when you're doing online learning, you don't necessarily want your kid in front of the computer for the same number of hours that they would have been in school. That is not going to be a great experience necessarily. And so you have to really carefully think about, okay, what needs to be done asynchronously? What do we want the student doing not on the computer, you know, out in the world or with physical materials or a book or something like that? And what do we want them doing synchronously online with their teacher or with classmates? And what we've seen in some cases is that allows, that asynchronous time does a couple things. One is with the proper support, it allows students to take more responsibility for their schedules and manage their time better, which is, Dave was talking a lot about college preparation. That's one of the big challenges in college, is you get to college and all of a sudden you're like, wait, I'm responsible to study and I've got a couple classes a day, and like, it's this huge, huge shift from high school. And so, you know, it's a nice learning experience in that way. The second one, which is really interesting, is that that asynchronous time has allowed a lot of students more time to pursue passion projects or do things that they're really interested in. Normally, those sorts of things have to get crammed into kind of the after school period or the weekend period, which is a really limited amount of time. But if a school is not assigning too much work, and I recognize that is one big problem that we're seeing, is some schools assigning a whole lot of work. But if they're kind of carefully rationing the work, it allows a student to take advantage of a lot of these opportunities to pursue their passions that they might not otherwise have. We have a lot of students who are even pursuing kind of to be professional athletes or things like that. And so really kind of able to pursue mastering a particular area. And so it's really just increasing the number of different ways of learning, and especially timetables of learning, which is something that higher education has understood for a long time. You know, if you think about like Southern New Hampshire University or some of these things, they understand some people can't learn during the day. This 9 to 5 schedule doesn't work for some people in terms of being able to learn. And so we're seeing moving online enables a lot more variety in terms of when people can learn. I definitely wouldn't say it works for everyone and like everyone should learn online, but it creates a lot more options. And that's some of the threats we see here. I mean, the obvious one is internet access, right? Is you need internet access, and if you don't have internet access, or if some of your students don't have internet access, there's some real challenges there. The other big one that I'm not sure people have figured out how to do particularly well is community. And that is a big part of school. And I don't know of anyone, I'd be curious if someone knows a great example of like an online community and how to do a really excellent job of that. If online education really does take off, I'd be interested to see something where we actually form stronger connections with our neighbors, which is something that I think has disappeared over time. And we have like a physical community actually with the people who live around us. And then maybe some of the learning occurs online. So we have play groups with kids who are neighbors and things like that. That could be really one direction that this could go. That would be really interesting and nice to see.
Cool, thank you. Thank you, Austin, for sharing. As we're living in the global village, people are kind of explore to different background or vast information. It's so good to know that online campus will help people to get more easier to access to their interests. So let's well move to Dave. In your opinion, or in your option, what are some outlooks of international education and the reforms needed in the future? Can you talk specifically about your school's future plan and the policy changes to prepare for the crisis like COVID-19, especially around providing education to young international students to the United States?
All righty, let me unmute and say, here we go. For the amount of time we have, short period, I wanted to hit on practicing safety, communicating safety, education in general, and local support for international students. First, the idea of practicing safety, we've really learned a lot. Learned so much more now about how to slow the spread of disease. Until now, we've been teaching and reminding students of the basics, but just like fire drills that are obviously not real, the purpose isn't really driven home until surviving an actual emergency shows the value of these practices that we've taught, rehearsed, reinforced ad nauseum. So it isn't so much that there will be newly reformed policies as it is that they'll have a newly understood importance and a relevance at all times. Where the innovation part will come into play is really how the procedures and routines are more broadly and consistently and effectively communicated to parents, the homestays, the students. And then it comes to communicating the safety. The link between the school and the students and their parents is really critical. As we work with our international students, as you know, each day we know how they're doing, and we come to care for them as if we're their own parents. But it's then so easy to forget that their real parents on the other side of the world don't really know everything that's going on. So I think classes such as our media studies class should also be monitoring what's on the news back in China and in other countries, providing factual perspective to parents back home could be a great assignment. I remember the Napa fires when Napa, which you all know is pretty far from here, was on fire, and there was smoke down here in San Jose. But parents in China, that's so far away, the news they're seeing made it seem like California was burning to the ground, and how were their children gonna be? That they seemed scared about it. I can imagine that Loma Prieta earthquake created just the same sort of panic. And again, we're finding with COVID, different countries, different media, different information getting out. And I think a very important part of our, the trust that we have been given with these children is communicating back to the parents so that they know, even, they can already log into the grade book, read teacher comments, but I think we will be putting an added emphasis on communicating more about how their child's life is going here. We've had, several examples of where that's already, been really, really helpful. For education in general, I think even the traditional schools that have avoided remote learning in the past, by now they've learned that a significant portion of their curriculum can be delivered remotely. That really brings to mind the potential to offer some more price competitive, lower division classes, whether it's the first 2 years of high school or the first 2 years of college. It's also potentially a way to help address the income disparity that was talked about last night back in China. But I can see an expansion of things like guaranteed admission programs. For example, finish our basic classes, online with Meet or Zoom, and the curriculum for maybe grade 9 and 10 or your general ed, finish it online with a certain GPA. And we will, one, provide the accredited transcript, no matter what happens with it from that point forward. provide the I-20 to come to the US to complete your diploma and degree, transfer all your credits onto our unified transcript. And I'd like to think that this could give us easier access to begin introducing the thinking outside the box skills again. I think it's also a way to very clearly demonstrate to the US consulate officials that this is a student whose primary interest is education rather than immigration. And it would obviously give us a much better handle on the state of the student's English fluency. The report cards, you know, I've had to get to sort of figure out and know certain schools in China or certain schools in Vietnam to know how much that actual, you know, 8 or 9 that they're given in English, you know, what it really means in terms of their actual fluency. I'd say from the emotional support standpoint, and it might just be me projecting, but it could allow moms to hang on to their babies for just a little longer without feeling that they're losing out on something or sacrificing the benefits of the education they want. And it, you know, it brings to mind to me that, you know, there was a time when our student international population grew faster than our homestay you know, availability. So my wife and I and our family, we took in up to 6 international students at a time. And I remember meeting one of them was a 12-year-old girl sent from China. And I'm thinking back to my own 12-year-old girl. I would not send her across the ocean to another country to live with, you know, strangers somewhere else. It's just, you know, an amazing thing. I point this commitment out to our own locals. I love pointing this out to our local students that look at how important education is to these international students. But is it as hard on parents as it would seem to me? It could, you know, it could be, but it could also be an easier way to keep the families together longer, prepare them for coming to the US, save some money rather versus being here getting homestay and so forth, paying the tuition. So I could see that being a way that what we've had to now, we had some online capabilities, but most schools now to sort of stretch their muscles and learn. And now that it's in place, I can see that as being something important. For the local support of international students, when things such as COVID-19 happen, family ties pull hard. I think any parent would want to immediately recall their child home. It's a tough choice that hundreds of thousands of families had to work through. How can they know their child's safe here? How can they know that their needs will be all met here? Well, we know they can't all be met here. A mom can't hug her baby over Zoom, but there can be some sufficient peace of mind. And how do we accomplish that? These are questions that really need to be addressed by schools because we treasure these kids as families. Fortunately, right now, we do have one student who returned to China for the rest of the school year. He's finally out of quarantine today and headed to his home, and today is the only school day he's missing due to that travel. But from him, I think we'll get lots of additional anecdotal information to help other students if a future thing like, you know, something like this happens again. We'll be more informed of, you know, the reasons of should you stay, should you go, what's that all going to mean? But the more comprehensive the school services are, I think the fewer stressful decisions the parents will need to deal with from the other side of the world. You know, we already combine as many services we can here. We're increasing the mentoring done by teachers and older students. So, you know, we're taking, you know, the best care possible of them. And I think want to mention, since we're talking about innovation and technology, I have one other last few seconds thing that I wanted to point out and maybe talk about later. One of the things that came up last night was technology, and maybe we can do some teacher training and help improve teachers. But I want to point out one thing that gets really overlooked and doesn't get the attention it deserves. Yes, we want the good quality of teachers, but teaching is a profession. It requires skill, it requires practice, it's dedication. And I remember 2008, when we got the recession 2008, I probably got 50 resumes from engineers who thought they could be math teachers just because they've been laid off from their job. We've got to transform the way people think about teachers, respect teachers, and understand the job that it is they're doing, because no matter how good the technology is, if you don't have that good teacher, none of the rest is going to matter.
Thank you so much, Dave. Very insightful comment. Especially, I like how you pay attention to all the small things, from students' need to teacher quality to training. Very insightful. Thank you so much for the sharing, and we have learned so much from you. So I will move on to the next question for Cindy. And so now we want to listen something about what's happening for local students. So Cindy, I know that you have a lot of experience in operations and strategic planning. Can you talk more about how schools and education institutions to how they maintain high qualities and achieve sustainable growth from the aspect of a school strategy, operations, and innovations? What do you think is the core value for school going forward? Thank you, Cindy.
Great, thank you so much for the question. Yeah, I mean, all of us, like all the educators, have been engaged in a lot of conversations about what is the vision of a good education and what does education innovation really means. We agree that education should be personalized, we care about students as whole child, and we want to raise global citizens and compassionate leaders. We can go very deep in this conversation about the vision of all education leaders should pursue, and we definitely should, because in education space, we have been waiting for reform and innovation for long enough. But my background has been in business and strategy. And when I approach the topic of school reform, I usually approach from a strategic point of view as well. One big question when I was working in a space that I have been wondering around was, how can we create an organization where innovation can be authentic, institutionalized, and sustainable? Right now, what we see the most in schools, no matter it's public school or charter school or private schools, what we see is across the board burnout of teachers and staff members and school leaders. All staff members are running around the clock to educate students academically and social emotionally, paying attention to every single detailed needs to support them and to support families so that students can focus on learning. And schools are also typically run under very great budget constraints. And it is not unusual that staff members wear multiple hats to make ends meet. The schedules are usually very overwhelming, no matter you're a teacher or a staff. We are struggling to finish teaching, to finish testing, to finish inputting scores, to finish making report cards. We can barely finish repeating what we already know how to do. Any changes of our routine may feel like a huge risk to take and a threat to a barely sustainable life already. So when we ask for innovation, we're usually asking under this kind of reality. We know creativity comes when we have mental space to think outside of the box, but the reality is that we may not even have the time to figure out what kind of box we are living in. And innovation may come when we draw insights from different disciplinaries and different industries, but we don't even have time to look beyond our specialized fields. Inspirations always come randomly, kind of, through unexpected conversations and interactions, but we're really struggling to even have a conversation about our colleagues' weekend. And we also know that innovation takes time to explore, to reiterate, to pivot, to refine. It is a very patient process, but we are forced to make decisions quickly in this very fast-paced environment. So then the question is, how can we truly innovate when we don't have what we need to be innovative, right? So from my perspective, I don't think innovation is just a pedagogical challenge. It is definitely an operational, managerial, and organizational challenge for all school leaders. It really requires leaders to make very intentional trade-offs, and a lot of times it's very hard trade-offs. It's easy to understand that if we want to commit to one pedagogy, we need to make inevitable trade-offs, right? We cannot invest in all elements equally in a model. Take Ming as an example. Our 4 important pillars are academic excellence, managerial immersion, leadership, social emotional curriculum, and also equity and diversity in our community. So those are the 4 things that Ming really prioritized in our model. And that means we have to shift all our resources to service these 4 priorities that may be and have to deprioritize other things that may be a priority in other school models. Likewise, if innovation becomes a priority of any school, resources needs to be shifted to support that strategic priority. And what does that mean is, what that means is that you may need to invest more in elements that will stimulate innovation and may have to cut costs in somewhere else. We may have to create space in teacher schedule to allow new ideas to flourish, even if that means spending money to hire more teachers. We may need to design our facility and space differently in a way where staff and students can interact authentically, where they naturally just mingle in the space to work and to learn on a daily basis. We also need to rethink about our school's rituals and our meeting schedules even, and instill elements of innovative ideation and intellectual discussion as a norm in an organization. We want the challenging of status quo become not something mandatory or optional, but something that's just intuitive and natural. And when someone actually did challenge the status quo, we want to jump on board with them and explore those ideas with them as a true support for the spirit of risk-taking. And that really requires us to understand that taking risk may mean incurring some cost. It may mean slowing down of our agenda, but that is something we have to invest in if innovation is true priority to us. And it also requires us to completely shift our mindset, our leadership mindset, our work style, and a lot of mindset in the organization, from prioritizing efficiency to prioritizing potential opportunities to transform. And those two sometimes doesn't go hand in hand. And it really also requires us to even change our organizational goals. So instead of defining achievement and performance in a traditional sense by test scores and by attendance, by like school climate in the traditionally defined way, we may need to courageously set some goals around innovation and be really specific about that. But I also have to say that this is not just an operational and organizational challenge. This is also something that's a political and social challenge. When our society is still struggling to define student success in a very conservative way, it is hard for schools to just completely deviate and pivot to define our success and accountability in a very different way, right? So that's especially true for public and charter schools. We all have to consider how the society is accepting our schools and how they define accountability that we have to pursue. So when all the stakeholders, all forces check and balance each other out and create this very awkward equilibrium that is very hard to break, my question is, what is each stakeholder's responsibilities and voices in shifting the paradigm little by little? Like as the school leaders, as government officers, as nonprofit organizations, teachers, or even students, what is our responsibility in making decisions differently and shifting this equilibrium day by day? Until we figure that out, I think any vision for good education will still remain pretty idealistic. And in the process of implementation, that vision will continue to be compromised. And we see a lot of examples of great schools who start with a very, very grand vision, and they just have to keep making compromised decisions and trade-offs until they become mediocre because of the pressure from the society and the pressure from scaling. So unfortunately, I'm still not at a place to provide any answer to these questions, but I'm challenging myself and all educators to consider the feasibility and sustainability when implementing any progressive vision. I believe there's a Chinese saying called drops of water wear a hole in a stone, 滴水穿石, right? As all forces work together to advocate for innovation, I'm really hopeful that one day our vision will come true.
Thank you so much, Cindy. Very inspiring conversation. I do remind me a lot of, you talk about the dynamic between the trade-offs and also the budget constraints. So it's very true in a school on the operation and strategic planning side. So thank you for pointing out that, and I hope educators among our audience can really understand what challenges the operation team and the management team really facing. So thank you for sharing about that. Last but not the least, the last question would be for Austin. So I know that you wrote a book. So in your book, The Element of Education for Teachers, you summarize the research of effective teaching ranging from direct instruction to creativity. Unlike many conventional K-12 institutions, but more similar to colleges to me, I know that Avenue has a significant number of teaching professionals and researchers working in research and development team, and you are part of that team. Can you talk about the relationship between research and innovation at schools? Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, research to me is really one of the essential things to innovation in schools and to a lot of innovation in general. It's so important because in order to have really groundbreaking innovation, you need to first understand how something works and then be able to build up from that. So in the case of schools, that means we need to really understand how learning takes place and then think about different strategies and formats and structures that we can use in order to foster learning in our students and in different contexts and mediums and things like that. A lot of schools have kind of a similar model right now, but one of the core things that they all have is that ability to promote learning and that being a core goal. Since this is the Epic China Forum, this approach really makes me think of the Deng Xiaoping quote, 不管黑猫白猫，捉到老鼠就是好猫. So it doesn't matter if a cat is white or black as long as it catches mice. And it's that kind of idea with schools too, right? So learning is really the core, and every school has to do that. And it doesn't matter if it's online or offline or whatever. It's got to promote learning with students. But cats aside, I'd say that a few things that are really important for learning are, if we go to some of these first principles, the student is paying attention and engaged, right? If you have a student that's not paying attention, can't do much, right? So no matter what the structure is, you gotta have the student paying attention. That students can only process a certain amount of information at a given time, right? You can't ever just dump a bunch of information on a student and expect them to get it. It's really a limited amount of information that we can use in our working memory, right? It's this 4 to 7 new pieces of information is the quantitative amount. And that students are getting quality feedback on their learning, and they're not kind of just trying things and not sure if it worked or not. These are some of the key things that students need, and how you do those in an online environment, and whether those happen in a synchronous space or an asynchronous space, those are all, that's going to be different, but you need to kind of go back to these research principles in order to think through those issues and come up with innovative approaches. And so by having those 3 things, and there are many others as well, those are just 3 examples, you can really expand the space in which to do innovative things. You can start changing the schedule and thinking about how to do more interdisciplinary experiences. Without that research basis, you can be kind of stuck looking at what other schools are doing and adopting best practices without understanding why they work, right? So you're kind of like, oh, well, that school's doing that, they seem to be good, and you can adapt it. Stanford and Harvard have this problem, actually, where a lot of schools try to imitate them without understanding there's some really important contextual differences between their schools and that school, and that it won't necessarily achieve the same effect. And so you really have to kind of understand how the mechanism works so that you're not just imitating. I'll give a brief example, I'm going to cut the example short so we have more time for Q&A, but I'll give one example and then open it for Q&A so we can have, I saw a number of questions coming in. So one project that Avenues has that I'm leading is called the Avenues Mastery Academy. And this is a program we're planning to open in Shenzhen, and we've been developing over a number of years. The idea is that it's a high school program that's focused on innovation and making. And so it teaches a full comprehensive curriculum of history and humanities and science, but through this lens of invention. And so students are actually building kind of core inventions that the modern day are built on, things like they're building their own computers and steam engines and things like that. And at the same time, understanding the history of where these inventions came from and the potential effects on society and ethical issues at the intersection of technology and humanity and society and all of these sorts of things. So in that program, if we go to this first principle of like needing to pay attention, one way to achieve that goal is by having a class schedule of 45 or 90-minute classes. And so when the student is in class, they're supposed to be paying attention, and that's one way that schools kind of get at that goal. In the Mastery Academy, we have a much more flexible schedule where students are actually setting their own project goals that they need to work towards, and then having kind of an indefinite amount of time in order to work towards them in the maker space that we have. And so in that case, the goal is the thing that is making sure the student is paying attention, as opposed to a schedule and the class period. And so it's getting at that same point, but it's going about it in a couple of different ways. There's other examples of that, but I'll stop there to make sure we have the 20 minutes promised for Q&A.
Sure, thank you, Austin. So school reform and innovation is always an interesting topic, and we can talk about it for hours. We also want to be mindful of our time, so please allow me to give a big thank you to our panelists and for your insightful sharing. And then now I will pass on the presentation to Kathy for the Q&A section. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Melody. Now I'm gonna start with the question that are being asked for the audience. So we will start with the general question. The first question is, how could we help families with multiple kids and their lack of assistance? So feel free to jump in if you want to comment on this.
Cassie, can you repeat the question again?
Yeah, for sure. So how could we help families with multiple kids and the lack of assistance?
Yeah, so we do have a lot of families with a lot of siblings. With a lot of kids, and students have siblings in our school. And I assume the question is asking about specifically under COVID-19, right? Like when a lot of kids are at home and they're all trying to get attention from the parents, how can we support? I think from the school point of view, definitely through a more well-designed kind of schedule where students' time is more occupied in a way that's engaging is the key to liberate parents from having to take care of them. So having engaging classes is the key, and it's the first thing that we can help with parents. And two is, how can we design student experience in a way that's clear so that students can be as self-sufficient as possible? So we're seeing schools that's leveraging very cool technology. For example, there is a school in Seattle that's using radio as a way to make announcement to all students at the same time. It's almost like a bell schedule, so that parents doesn't have to remind the students every hour that they have to get on this Zoom link or they have to do this homework. All the school has to do is to get on the same radio, and all the students get on the same radio in the morning, and then the school can make announcement and all students will be able to hear that. So that's a way of taking the responsibility as a school to help the students self-direct. And of course, as the student gets older and starting from grade 3 and up, students are a lot more self-sufficient. So we are really talking about younger kids who need more support. So really, like, in short, it's engaging class and how can we think from the family's perspective to leverage technology to design a student experience as self-sufficient as possible.
Thank you.
I think I could share one quick example as well. We have a lot of, especially with the international, we've sometimes had 3 siblings here at once, but we also have some that have gone out and graduated. We have the younger ones here and we stay in touch with them. So just when we switched to our remote learning, had a younger sibling of one of our graduates from back 2000, I think 12 or 13, who's now graduate school at UC Irvine. We stay in touch with them. Our graduates really kind of know our methods, what we're about, what we expect, and are able to end up being good role models, hopefully for the younger ones. And we had one where the younger one wasn't logging on quite as often as he was supposed to. And so I was able to call up. I know our graduates. It's a good thing about being small, we know them all. And being able to kind of rely on siblings to help and mentor each other, they take that responsibility, and I think it's great to see how they've matured and how they take on that responsibility to kind of give the same to their younger siblings. So I think it's just the networking, and it's just the knowing the family and knowing how to get the siblings to help each other.
Thank you. So, should I?
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Do you want to contribute? Let's move to the next question, unless Austin want to share something. Or...
Yeah, it's just a different situation in Avenues Online because it's opt-in, right? And so the parents choose to attend in Avenues Online, so they figured out kind of the home care situation for themselves already. So it's just a different context, I think.
Perfect, thank you. So the next question, also a general question to apply to everyone who want to jump in to answer for it. So during the COVID-19, Asian international students and some other Asian communities in the US have been facing more frequent racism harassment. What are some advice that you would to give to educators to support their Asian students going through this kind of difficult time?
I'm happy to start first. Very fortunately, in our UMing community, we didn't quite experience that just yet, and we see ourselves as incredibly fortunate in that sense. And if I think from the educator's point of view, I think it's very important to first break down the situation and really use this COVID-19 as a case study for our students to understand a lot of information about our society and break this issue down for the students, so at least the student community understand what is going on and will have a very positive kind of understanding of the situation. So we stop the racist, at least from our student community. And it's also about educating the parent community and really use our school as a hub to share positive energy to the society. I think it's also about really partnering with other organizations to understand where is the difficulty coming from and how can we provide support as a school, no matter it's social, emotionally, or like just physically, to help whoever is going through that difficult time to just be able to go through.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, that seems right on, like supporting the student and the educator emotionally. I think the other potential reminder is like people, it's a scary time. It's a really hard, scary time for a lot of people. And so trying to support the student and educators from that perspective as well, of trying to understand, you know, that's they shouldn't feel that as a personal attack necessarily, right? And try to understand, like, it's an expression of fear and anger and a lot of other things that you know, thousands and millions of people are experiencing right now.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing.
I'll try to do this without getting all riled up, because that's one of those topics that really bothers me. It just seems, I try to, you know, at least in our educating the students here ongoing, we try to make clear just how really ignorant it is to, you know, there's certain, you know, obviously people understand there's stereotypes that kind of help you make life judgments and so forth, but when you just simply taking a sort of the ignorant point of view that we've seen here, that's just, you know, really wrong. And it's like in any of the situations when we're teaching students how just to deal with other people, I think kind of bouncing off one of the other points here, you always got to think, well, I tell them, that person does not know you well enough for you to take it personally. It's their own problem. It's really, it's kind of in their own faulty thinking. And, you know, if you have the opportunity to step up and educate that person, good for you. But it's not just here, and it's not just against, you know, the Asian community suspected of bringing it here. It happens all around the world. As I was researching to help our students make the right decisions if to stay or go back, you know, I find that in Vietnam, the Vietnamese students returning home, those are the ones that are having this prejudice leveraged against them by their own for possibly bringing this back. Now you're overloading our own, you know, you're overloading the quarantine ability there. I mean, they're almost, you know, there's the treatment in, you know, in strange situations where there's a lot of unknowns. You have to realize that it's irrational and hopefully just passing.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. And thank you, everyone. This is all the time that we have for today. I want to thank our panelists again for their insight and their time, and also everyone who's here today with us for making this possible. We hope you enjoyed this panel and they will join us this Saturday, May 2nd at 2:30 Pacific time for those who in the United States, or May 2nd at 5:30 a.m. for those who are in China for our last panel of AdTech ecosystem. If you have any questions, concerns, or comments, please feel free to reach out to us through our LinkedIn page or through our email. We're open to any feedbacks. And thank you for today again. And please also feel free to check our LinkedIn page for the expo. And we're looking forward to seeing you again.
Thank you, everyone. I'll see you tomorrow at
Thank
the
you.
panel.
Melody and Casey. Nice meeting you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Cindy. Bye.
Bye, Austin.